All lies. And thank you, Ed. Gracias. Thank you, everyone, for coming, letting me come to Colombia. It's a beautiful city, beautiful country. Ed had us all in the, well, you saw. We went up in the mountains and la comida. Oh. I'm a big guy. Yeah, I'm all about the food. Es más mejor. All right. Okay, so yeah. He says I'm puertorriqueño, pero no hablo mucho español. Lo siento. So for years, security's been around for a few decades, right? 2, 3 decades. And we just, some of these basic problems, like knowing what we have, is still a really tough problem to solve. You go to any CISO, any company, with more than maybe 500 employees, and getting an accurate list of assets is very, very difficult. How many servers do you have? Yeah, maybe that's easier. How many workstations? How many laptops? How many laptops are here right now? How many are taken home? Back when I worked for a bank, we used to, I first got into security, we would test physical security, and we'd get a cart, and we'd just start loading up computers that were not used in cubicles, just loading them up. Security guard would help us out the door. We'd put it in the trunk of a car just to see if anyone would stop us. Asset management is very hard. But we're going to talk about more than just that. I'm going to go over all kinds of stuff here. I've got many slides. As you see, if you used a QR code or the email, I've got extra content for you, a few extra PDFs, extra documents. I'll give you that QR code again at the end of the presentation if you didn't get it. So I've done a lot of different things on purpose. I wanted to see this industry from different perspectives. So I've been a defender. I worked for a large credit card processor. That's where I learned security. I consultant, PCI QSA, and pen tester for many years. Industry analyst, if you don't know what industry analysts are, like Forrester, Gartner, IDC, write about the industry. That was very interesting, learning how the money works. Venture capital, private equity, acquisitions, mergers. And then I've always done research, but that became more of a full-time thing. Working for vendors during doing research has been a more recent thing for me. All right, why is it so hard to get systems secure? So, first of all, I don't know if you've ever seen any of these CISO diagrams, all a CISO's responsibilities. How many people here are the only security person in their organization? One person in charge of all this, right? And security is not, it's not like being a sysadmin. It's not like being a database, DBA, database administrator. It's not one thing. It's covers all the things. Technology, privacy, if you need to investigate an internal employee, stuff that has nothing to do with technology, you have to wear all these hats. So it's tough. So we were talking about asset management. I don't even know where that is. It's maybe over there somewhere. And then technology keeps changing. It won't sit still. The moment you figured out how to do one thing, something else new technology. BYOD, we never figured out BYOD. Employees bring in their own laptops, their own devices. Do we notice when that happens? Do we know that they plug it in? Do we know what data is going on to it? It's still a very hard problem. And now we've got cloud and we've got all these other things. You know, the latest thing that I've seen is hacking high-end car alarms here. You know, and this is, I don't know if we have audio going through the HDMI, but I wasn't going to play the whole thing. And basically, they can turn off the engine. You know, they can unlock the doors. They can see where the car is. They know what model it is, what make. It's crazy. Just because it's new technology, no one's looked at it yet. No hackers have looked at it. No security professionals have looked at it. There's always some new technology we haven't looked at yet, and they didn't think about security. So it's all broken. More, you know, just more and more work for us to do. It's focused on the video. So, like I said, cloud, IoT, privacy, GDPR. Many people in this room, it's one person doing all these different things that are completely unrelated to each other, except that they need someone with a security mind looking at them and figuring out where the problems are, how to fix them. A casino got hacked through a fish tank. Who saw that coming? Who looked at that fish tank and said, I need to secure that? That could be a problem. Nobody. Nobody's going to look at a fish tank and say, we got to fix that. That's on the internet. And supply chain. Supply chain. That's a big one. You know? Yeah, you don't have to hack computers that are already there if you can hack them before they get shipped. You know, you buy something you think it's brand new and it's already tampered with. Yeah, supply chain is tough. Crypto mining. Nobody saw crypto mining coming. We didn't predict that. One company invented a way that you could use someone's computer, their processing power, through a web browser. And because that one company did that, crypto mining became a thing. Because one company innovated new technology, all of a sudden we have a new category of crime because of that one startup. What was the name of that startup? Anybody remember? No? Okay. So attack surface. You know, I talked earlier, you know, where's your computers? Where's the laptop? Do employees take them home? Are they on a, does this have a pointer? Are they in a coffee shop? Are they using a mobile hotspot? You know, are they using apps that aren't approved? Is your data in Dropbox? Is your data in Evernote? You know, you got to track all this stuff. So the attack surface is huge. The amount of networks your devices can connect to. And there's not really a good set of rules for this. You know, where's the instructions, you know, for tackling all this? Like David said earlier, you know, only 5 years ago did PCI come out with guidance on cloud. You know, it takes time to catch up. You know, regulations, standards are never going to keep up with technology. You have to keep up with the technology. You have to know all the new software, the new devices, what they can do, how they can do it. You have to know if that fish tank is on the internet. You see somebody plugging a Cat5 cable into the back of a fish tank, you need to ask questions. And then so many different kinds of devices. Like when I say patching, you probably think Windows. But all these things have to be patched. You know, it's not just Windows. You know, since we're putting software in just about everything, And the big thing with software now that we can use the internet to update it, how many people in here play games? You remember a time when you bought a game and that was the game? There were no updates. It was done. When they shipped that game, when you got that Nintendo cartridge, there was no patch. Like, that was the game. It was done. They couldn't update it. Now you get a new game, you have to download 30 gigabytes, 40 gigabytes patches. You got to wait 12 hours before you could play it. And everyone's doing that. They can say, we can release it before we're done. Yeah, it's got bugs in it, but we can patch it. We'll put out a patch. So, and some of those are security issues. We'll fix it later because we have an update mechanism if you use it. Another problem, noisy security products. How many alerts do you have in your inbox right now? How many people in here have more than 100 alerts unread? You haven't looked at them in your inbox right now. I do. Yeah? More than 1,000 alerts unread? I talked to a company. They said their DLP product, their data loss prevention product, generated 180,000 alerts daily. That's a useful purchase. Yeah, yeah. Who else got the joke here? These are all bass players. I play bass. Dave plays bass too. That's another talk I give, why InfoSec plays bass. For some reason, we have more bass players than drummers, guitar players, pianists. And then there's a whole host of other problems. You know, we've got politics, you know, we've got legacy systems we can't get rid of, you know, just all these reasons we can't get things done. You know, our to-do list is huge, and it grows faster than we can knock it out. Like, to give an example, you know, one of the things I really warn people about is buying products. Where do I have that? Buying products to fix problems. Because oftentimes you can get a lot more problems than a product solves. I've seen 18-month efforts to get a DLP system implemented, only to get 180,000 alerts daily. So you got to be very careful about that. All right, so that's a lot of problems. So just, you know, don't worry about it. We're gonna talk about how to get past that, how not to worry about it. Just be calm. It's okay. That's my wife when I tell her to be calm. And when she tells me to be calm. So what can we do? What can we do about this? We do have some good standards, some good systems out there. I think CIS is very good. But you can't follow it step by step, 1 through 20. I mean, look at just, like, these are foundational. Like, if that's our foundation, what's this? Like, that's below the foundation? Is there a foundation below the foundation? Like, this stuff up here, the basic controls are hard. They're really hard. But this is the important stuff? This is foundational? Come on. And this is something that we're always saying. You know, yeah, we call them basics. I mean, they are foundational, but that doesn't mean it's easy. You know, it's really hard, and you need a plan to get through it. And you see it over the years, over and over and over. We see security professionals say, just do the basics. Why didn't you just patch? Do you have any idea what patching is like in my environment? You know, I have to go through change control, you know, I got to submit it. You know, they reject it because I forgot to put a backup plan. So yeah, nothing basic about the basics. These are what CIS tells us the basics are. Anyone in here familiar with CIS? With the top 20? CIS top 20? It's a very good list. But you don't want to try and do all of it at once, or even particularly in that order. You don't have to go in the order that it prescribes. It's okay to skip around. You know, it depends on your company, what's important to yours. But even this is too much, you know? Like take away admin from everybody. Like that's an easy step, right? You know, the day after you take away admin, you get 200 requests to give admin back. You know, can I get an exception? So let's simplify this further. Let's take out some of this. Let's just talk about asset discovery, vulnerability management, and hardening for a little bit. Just these three things can be huge. You know, I think we can break this down even to this point is very useful. Even if you just focus on these three things, has a huge effect. And again, even with each of these items, you don't have to do them 100%. You know, you don't have to stop everything else just to do asset discovery until you have every single last asset. These are all going to be iterative. There's always going to be additional assets. There's always going to be stuff you missed. As a pen tester, I've gone into organizations and found the security team didn't know about entire networks. There were entire networks they weren't aware of in the organization because they weren't managed by IT. Maybe they're managed by telecom, or manufacturing has their own network that they manage themselves. So it's iterative. Don't worry about it if you don't get it all at once. And a lot of vulnerabilities, most vulnerabilities are not important. Creating vulnerabilities, sorry, Chad, is a business. You know, all through the 2000s, Qualys, Rapid7, Tenable, you know, that was their marketing. We can find more vulnerabilities than these guys. We can find 80,000. We can find 100,000. You know, we can give you so many emails in your inbox, you'll never get through them. You know, and you're going to buy their product for that. So yeah, most of them are worthless. So the question is, you know, how do we find the ones that matter? And some hardening is overkill. I've seen a lot of security people just go way, like that hack's not going to happen to you. Like you're not a target for China. You're just not. You're not that important. So don't worry about that. And again, I mentioned products. Be very, very careful. When you buy a SIM, understand you need 5 people to run that SIM, right? You know, how many people do you need to run some of these products? I've seen so many companies go out, spend $250,000 on a SIM. Who's going to run it? Yeah, it just sits there. Like they put some logs in it. They use it every now and then. Yeah, it sits on the shelf. Doesn't produce value. So let's talk about asset discovery a little bit. So you have to consider all the different kinds of assets you have. And this is very rudimentary stuff, very basic stuff. All the locations you can have those assets. You know, it used to be we could just worry about the assets within these walls on this network. Like we knew where all the assets were. They were at this address, in this building, in these 3 buildings, in these 5 remote offices. Now it's in the cloud. Now it's going to your employees' homes. Now it's going to, who knows, coffee shops, airport, other countries. And then finally, software assets. You know, traditionally, you know, when we talk about patching, we're all thinking about operating systems. Maybe we're thinking about updating IoT, we're thinking about firmware, but we've got server software, we've got code that we write internally. The big one now is third-party libraries. You know, most traditional vulnerability management systems are never going to get down to that level. You know, that's a whole new category now that people realize they have to worry about. And then user applications, shadow IT. Is shadow IT a common term? Do you know what I mean when I say shadow IT? So your company doesn't use Evernote, but employee downloads it, starts putting data in it, or same thing with Dropbox. You know, that was a big thing lately is a bunch of companies have things published publicly on Box. Didn't realize it was open to the whole world because one employee can make 1,000 documents public. So shadow IT. So user applications, even websites. These are all things that either have to be patched or worried about now. So strategies. All these comes with pros and cons. Initially, we scan the network. We run a scan, but the problem with that is maybe systems are turned off when we scan. Maybe there's network problems and packets get dropped and we miss things. An active network scan is always going to miss things. And passive scanning, you just see what's talking on the network. So 2 and 4 are my favorite because the network is king, right? Like you're only worried about vulnerabilities on systems that are networked, that can be touched, that can be hacked. So if the network talks to it, that's one of your best places to get asset discovery. And situational awareness is the goal. It's not only to know what assets you have, but what they are. So like a lot of these scanners, like even today, again, sorry, Chad, but Rapid7 is using Nmap under the covers. And Nmap is terrible at telling what the operating system is. Like it'll tell you Linux, but is it Amazon Echo? Is it Linux server? Is it some kind of embedded IoT device? Is it a camera? Everything runs Linux. Don't tell me it's Linux, that's not useful. So it's tough. So we need to know that it's there and what it is. And there's a lot of resources here. NetDB is one that will actually log into Cisco devices. It'll log into your routers, log into switches, say, tell me everything you've talked to. And you can get a list of everything that's on your network. And we really want to take it even a step past that. Why shouldn't we be able to get instant notification when a new device goes on the network? If you're a Dell shop, use all Dell servers, Dell laptops, shouldn't you know when an HP gets plugged in, or Lenovo, or Huawei? Why shouldn't we be able to get instant notifications when that happens? I can at home. I have a device I paid $100 for, tells me on my phone, the moment something new comes on my network, I get an alert. And it asks me, hey, what do you want to do with that? Do you want to block it, allow it, put it in a group? And this is at home. This is a consumer device. This is not even built for enterprise. So if we can do that at home, we should be able to do that at the enterprise level. And this thing it's called a Fing box. So it's kind of hard to see down here, but F-E-N-G. What is, I don't know G. I can't remember. Huh? Okay. So yeah, you can say automatically block new devices, and you get a notification. You can say, hey, I want to manage that. And but even these still have some bugs. 49 años. What? There's some bugs. But still, it told me. It told me it was there. And me, I don't know what HS100 is. I have no idea what that is. So I go investigate. And it'll be the same in the enterprise. When you're doing asset discovery, if you haven't done it before, beyond just Windows systems and servers and laptops, you'll find a bunch of stuff where you have no idea what it is. Maybe it's a fish tank. Maybe it's HS100, whatever that was. I don't even remember. I think I blocked it. All right, so the next one, moving on from asset discovery, let's talk about vulnerability fatigue. So again, talking about all those emails in your inboxes, all the stuff that these vulnerability scanners come back with. That's how they built these businesses, was to create more and more vulnerability checks. But the problem is, they're telling you, oh, this is CVSS 10. It's critical. But a lot of times it's not. So I kind of described this already, but building more and more noise, more and more vulnerability checks was the business. In fact, if you work R&D in one of these companies, if you're creating Metasploit modules. If you're creating plugins for Tenable, you have to create a certain number every month to get your bonus. So imagine one day before the end of the month, what's the quality of these plugins, of these vulnerability checks you're gonna write? You wanna get your bonus. So you're gonna write, internet Barbie vulnerability checks, fish tank vulnerability checks, whatever. You're gonna get your bonus. So what happened here is the industry created the haystack and dropped it on the needles. And now we have to find those needles in the haystack. So what my company does, I'm VP of strategy at NOPSEC. That's exactly what we try to do, is we try and find those needles. And it's really hard. It's very difficult. What we do know for sure is that there's really just a few dozen vulnerabilities every year that result in most of the malware getting in, most of the breaches that we see. It's a very, very small number. But the number you start out with is, I think it's over 20,000 vulnerabilities are discovered every year at this point. But only a dozen matter. So getting down to those is difficult. And in our research, and you can find this, I probably should have put a link in here to it, but our report, we found 1/5, only 20% of CVEs, which CVEs are, who's not familiar with CVEs? Everybody knows CVE, Common Vulnerability E? Enumeration? Yeah, it's a United States system for database of vulnerabilities, basically. Russia has one, China has one, United States has one. There's some private commercial vulnerability databases, but this is the most common one that everyone uses. When you're using Qualys, Tenable, Rapid7, this is what they're going to be using for a lot of their stuff. You're going to see CVE numbers in there. And we found out only 20% of them have exploits that are public. And I can tell you from experience, most of those exploits are not exploits, and they don't work. So it's not 20%. It's probably less than 1%. Only 1.6% have Metasploit modules. I can guarantee you, if a vulnerability comes out that is easy to exploit remotely, these guys who write Metasploit modules are going to get their bonus if they write a module for this vulnerability that can get them into a system. So there will be a Metasploit module if it's a useful vulnerability. So over 98% of what these scanners are bringing back is probably not dangerous to your business, is the bottom line here. Less than 2% are associated with malware. Even this number is probably a lot lower than this because there's a lot of issues with the threat intelligence that we use to determine this. There's a lot of false positives. So even these numbers, maybe divide by 10. Move a decimal point. Yeah. Oh, sorry. State of, well, it's a shorthand for what we call state of risk and vulnerability management. Yeah, so every year we have a report. It has the same name every year, and we're just looking at the state of vulnerabilities. Yeah. So it's an annual report we do. We update the numbers. We look at new things every year, but yeah, that's our shorthand. So, and we found some interesting things here. If you use the CVSS scoring, which is basically a method of telling, if it's critical, not important, medium, high, low, we found 95% of the ones scored the highest have never been used in the wild. Never going to be dangerous, never used by an attacker. And then almost half had low scores that were used, that were dangerous. So if you say, okay, I'm only going to fix the important stuff, what these companies tell me is important, it's basically a lie. You're going to miss almost half of the stuff that can do damage to you. So in other words, the scoring system, if you're going by that CVSS scoring system, it's no better than random, than just choosing vulnerabilities to fix at random. All right, so obviously we have to prioritize this somehow. We can't use CVSS to prioritize it. So I mentioned Metasploit's a good way to prioritize it. If there's a Metasploit module for it, it's probably something that can be used to hurt you. Even within Metasploit, they have a scoring system, 1 to 5. A 1 is useless. 2 is pretty much useless. You won't see a penetration tester use anything with less than a 3 on that scale of 3 to 5. So the more you dig into this, the more useless information, the more haystack that you find. So yeah, and we found if you're going to patch, if it's really a threat, you've got to patch within 24 hours, 48 hours. Anything longer than that, it's too late. If somebody's going to write a worm for it, ransomware, or reach out on the internet, start hitting it like the strut stuff, generally, sometimes you'll have a week to patch before they start taking advantage of this vulnerability, but often as short as 24 hours, 48 hours. So look at this a different way. Assume the vendor's never going to make a patch, or the patch is not going to get to you in time. This is how you have to build your systems. This is how you have to plan, for dealing with these issues. Assume there's always a vulnerability in your systems, and the patch is never coming, and you'll be fine. So in other words, you have to have mitigations. You have to think, okay, if this server gets hacked, how do I stop the attacker there? Okay, they get in, that's not the end of the world. Very few breaches, very few big cyber events have ever occurred where the bad guys only hacked one thing. Usually they have to hack one thing, pivot to another, move to another, figure out this problem. It takes some time, and they have to pivot to different systems. So think about how you can stop them, how you can compartmentalize your systems, your network, your security controls. Even if it's manual, you want to know when somebody gets into a system, maybe you can manually just go over, shut down that system, or isolate that system, if you know about it. So hardening is it's a big deal. Hardening systems, to me, the way I think about hardening, I think systems have 3 states. So the first state, it's not secure. You haven't patched it. It's default configuration. Maybe it has default passwords on it. That's the lowest state. The next state, you've patched it, secure defaults, but you haven't done anything to harden it. So if somebody got into that system, if it had a 0 day, you're no better off than if you were at that lowest level. And then the top level, that's when you've hardened it. You've done more than just get rid of the problems. You've thought about, okay, what if an attacker gets in? How do I handle that? You've thought through some of these scenarios, and you've done extra. You've gone beyond that baseline that PCI would have you do, or some of these different regulations would have you do. You didn't stop at the baseline, at the minimum. So, and really when I'm talking about hardening here, I'm not talking about buying products, not putting AV on things. These days, most products have security features built in. A lot of them have really, really good security features built in, but nobody's using them. I hear this constantly from vendors. I remember talking to Symantec at one point, and an engineer was complaining. He said, we get this bad name, but our product can do everything that these guys can do. Our customers are leaving for these guys. And he showed me the product, the current state of the product. And, you need You need a degree, like a PhD, to configure this, their endpoint product. You have to go to a training class to make it work. And I said, well, all those amazing things it does, why don't you make it do that by default instead of making your customers dig in there and go through this maze, go through these puzzles to succeed? So it's the mentality of a lot of these products. And some of them are getting better. Like Microsoft is 1,000 times better. Like default Windows 10 with Defender, most malware has no chance of infecting that. Whereas default Windows 10 with some of these products that you'd actually pay money for, you're actually much worse off. So Microsoft is doing some things very, very right. And the rest of the industry could learn from it. So when I'm talking about hardening here, I'm really talking about just using the features already built into the products. That's why I say it's almost free. It costs you nothing except your time. Dig in, learn what those security features do. Find the blog posts that describe, here's how you lock down Microsoft Office so that macros can't hurt you. Here's how you lock down PowerShell so that you can still use it, but malware can't. It's not just on or off with Office macros and PowerShell, for example. Like there are degrees in between. And you need to learn about those. So this is, the low-hanging fruit. I hear this all the time from enterprises that get it right. They never have malware infections, never. Like after they've done these things, never again do they see a piece of malware on their network. These things don't get hacked. And all they've done is they said, okay, how do all these things get in? And like I said, it's a short list. It's like a dozen things. If you look, Microsoft puts out a report about every 6 months called the SEIR. What does it stand for? Security. Somebody know that report? So it's a security report. The letters are SIR. Security Intelligence Report. I think it's that simple, Security Intelligence Report. And they'll tell you, here's the 5 pieces of malware that caused 99% of the problems, and here's the 3 vulnerabilities they used to do it. And I guarantee you, almost every time it's Java, Flash, Office, Java, Flash, Office. So you address Java, Flash, Office, and you're already, 100 times better. Your security is 100 times better. You're not going to see most of the malware anymore. And CIS has benchmarks for Apple, iOS, iPhones, servers, Linux servers, Windows servers. They have benchmarks for all kinds of things that tell you what these security features are, what they do, and how you can use them. So these benchmarks are really useful. They're free, and you don't want to use all of the recommendations. If you take a CIS benchmark and you do 100% of what it says, the computer doesn't work anymore. But, it's more for you to go through and pick and choose. Yes, we can do this without breaking things. We can do this. This will help. So you have to pick and choose. You don't want to do 100% of it. And I really mean that. Get rid of Windows 7. Windows 10 is that much better, especially with Defender. It really is that much better. And this coming from pen testers, I know some pen testers, we have some pen testers that specialize in bypassing antivirus and exploiting systems without antivirus noticing. And Windows 10 with Defender, they've never been able to hack it. They always go after the Windows 7 systems, and that's how they get in. All right, so the goal with hardening, like I said, it's not 100%. That's not the goal. The goal is to get good enough that you're difficult to attack. Someone's going to go somewhere where it's easier. They're going to go after something simpler. So perfection is not the goal. It's to think through these scenarios. How are you going to be attacked? how does everyone else get attacked? How did that breach occur? You know, think about how you're going to survive that if that breach happens to you. You know, find those details of how the breach happens. You know, like with Equifax, there was a U.S. government investigated, released a full report, all the details. Here's how it happened. Here's all the places they failed, and we're actually going to look at that here in a moment. Time check. How was it? 5:15? Okay, good. I think we'll have time. Survivability, durability. Instead of looking at these systems as fragile, you know, it takes one vulnerability, one smart attacker to get in and to knock over the whole network. You know, if you've built a system where one user can click a link in an email, in a phishing email, and it's all over, yeah, I mean, that's a very fragile system. You know, you need durability is the mindset you need to have. You need to say, okay, this one system gets hacked, that's fine. You know, what's the next step? Can we stop them there? Can we limit the intrusion there? That's the question you need to ask. I see too many security teams saying, we've got to stop them at the first step, at the first point. And they put all their energy there. And of course, that first point's gonna fail. There's always a vulnerability you don't know about. There's always something you missed. So you've got to stop the attacker at the second point. Like I said, you know, nothing gets hacked, you know, from one event, from one thing that the attacker does. You know, they have to do 15, 16, 47 different things. You know, so you have opportunities to stop them. You have to think through that. Okay, how do we stop them at step one or step two? And that's what I call resilience. You know, and that's what we need to aim for with systems. So another thing that we're not great at doing that we have to get better at is testing our controls, making sure they actually work. I've seen so many companies, you know, pay $1 million, you know, put in a system, have professionals come, install it, configure it. Nobody ever tests it. Is it stopping anything? Is it doing anything? Because defensive systems fail silently. You don't know when it fails. You know, you're hoping it's working. You know, I had somebody tell me once that security was a faith-based industry. And it's not far from the mark. You know, I've seen so many companies that for years had these systems. They paid a lot of money for them. They paid for the support. The company came in, set it up. The employees all went to training on it. It was plugged into the wrong port on the switch. It was never seeing any traffic. And they're like, man, this is the best system. We have no alerts. There's no extra emails in my inbox. This is great. It's because it's plugged into the wrong place or it's turned off. You know, like, how do you know it's turned on? Do you have an alert set up that tells you when it's powered off? A lot of security departments I've seen, you know, we didn't know it was turned off. So that was one of the things with Equifax, is they had a certificate, and Chad mentioned this this morning, that was expired for 18 months. So for 18 months, that system wasn't seeing decrypted traffic. It was only looking at encrypted traffic. So none of its alerts worked. You know, it was an IPS. Not seeing anything, blind. 18 months before they noticed. The moment they restored that certificate, they saw they were getting hacked immediately. So yeah, when you're an attacker, you know when you win. You know when you get into that system. When you're a defender, you have no idea when you fail. So we have to set up processes and systems so that it's obvious when we fail. We need to make it obvious. If somebody turns off the IPS, if the cert expires, somebody needs to know about it. Somebody needs to get, you know, they need to be getting pestered, yelled at, something needs to be yelling at them. Update the certificate. So here's some resources you can use to do that. They're all free. So Rita is more of a network-based thing. You know, that kind of like I don't know a whole lot about it. I've heard a lot of good things about it, but more network-based discovery like an IDS. I'm sure somebody would cringe if they heard me call it that, but I don't know a better name to call it. Infection monkey is like safe malware that you can run in your environment. It doesn't do anything bad, but it acts like malware. So it'll spread like WannaCry. It'll spread like some of these ransomwares, some of these worms. And it reports back. It tells you, it gives you a full list of how it was able to hack this system and move from here to here. So it simulates an attacker. And for both Linux and Windows, I believe, they have agents or malwares. So it's like a good malware you can release. If you've ever wondered, what would ransomware do in our environment if we ever got it? You can run this and it'll tell you. It's using some of the same vulnerabilities that the malware uses. Same, you can even give it a list of common passwords and it'll brute force, it'll use those passwords. It's got all kinds of features and options. It's great. So if you use the QR code, something I came up with, I call a breach impact assessment. Basically, it's like, I had a lot of clients that didn't need a pen test. They would not benefit from a pen test. What they really needed was to know what it would look like in their environment if they had a breach. A lot of them were mid-size, not large enterprise, and they used MSSPs. Does that translate? Ed, MSSP, is that? Yeah, okay. Yeah, so MSSP, if you're not familiar, you basically outsource. Instead of you doing a bad job with security, you pay them to do a bad job with security. Basically, well, some of them are good. A lot of them aren't. And every breach impact assessment we did, MSSP never saw any of the activity. Like we simulated WannaCry, like really obvious stuff, and just no idea. And the client's sitting there, they're sitting there looking at their phones. They're like, they're going to call. They're going to call and say somebody's hacking us. No call. So when I say test your products, yeah, even the services, the third parties that are doing security for you, oftentimes an MSSP will give you a product. Did they plug it into the right port? No, in some cases. And in fact, there's some great stories out there when that happened. It wasn't plugged into the right thing. Nobody validated it. For years, it sat there doing nothing. And then Blue Team CTF. So this is a company called OpenSOC, OpenSOC. And at B-Sides events, at some events like this, maybe it's something we could do here in the future, they set up a capture the flag event, except you're the good guys. So most capture the flags, you try and hack in as the bad guy. But in this case, they give you access to a SIM, they give you access to all the different tools a defender would have, someone on the blue team. And they give you scenarios. They say, Jane got a malware infection. Try and figure out what website it came from and when, and you enter it here and we tell you if you got it right. So it actually teaches you to use these tools. It teaches you to find incidents and attacks in these different events. And I did it at DEF CON last year, and I just stayed there for the rest of the conference. I loved it. It was so much fun. Because they put together fun scenarios with good stories. The tools were all set up correctly. It was easy to log into them and just start finding attacks. And it's so rewarding, when you're working an incident to find that thing that you're looking for. And it was very realistic the way they set it up. I spent a lot of my career doing incident response, and it was just, it was very nostalgic for me. So this is a tool created by a man at Bank of America named Sunil Yu. And he calls it the Cyber Defense Matrix. And it looks simple, right? It's just a grid. It's just a rubric. But it helps you see where gaps are in your environment. Across the top, we have the different jobs that security has. Identifying assets, we talked about that, protecting them, detecting attacks, and then when we find an attack, respond and recover. And then, down this side, we have all the different categories of things that we do these jobs with. We have devices, applications, the network itself, data, which can be really hard, and then people themselves. And then as you see at the bottom here, at least until recently, these stages have been very manual. When an attack happens and we have to recover from it, that's usually 100% manual. You unplug a machine, you're going to re-image it, you're going to take it off the network. Help desk is going to put a new image on it. It's been very manual. It's starting to change, but that's what you see across the bottom there is technology goes away as we get further down here. But like Chad mentioned earlier today, there's companies like Demisto, doing automation, orchestration, especially focusing here, trying to use technology to make some of this easier. But all of it requires process. So again, echoing Chad, yeah, people and process. There's a reason they come before technology. And so what we're talking about today is a very small piece. You can see is a very small piece of the whole here. That's all it covers. And it doesn't even cover all of this. So this is, it's the same things, identify, prevent, detect, respond, recover, just with some examples here. And when we're talking about the basics, it's all over here. And then here's some different product categories, some different process categories. But I mean, you need to have some of this. I say focus on these basics first, but you could have an incident today. You could have an incident tomorrow. So it's still really important to have an incident response plan to understand how you're going to handle that incident. So I mean, there's no good answer there. I can't say do this one thing and you can ignore everything else until you get done with it. I wish it could be that simple, but no. I'll make sure you get there's a lot of stuff here, so I'll make sure you get a copy. We find some way to get you a copy of the presentation, right? Oh, okay, in 2 weeks, these slides will be on the website if you want to, or take a picture now. So this is the same matrix, except I've filled in everything with examples. So this is not exhaustive, it's not every example, it's just some examples. Just so you can understand how this works. If you stare at this for, it's like one of those magic eye puzzles, you stare at it long enough, it'll start to make sense. Listo? No? Come on, man, we're waiting on you. Good? Also, we're going to run out of time here soon. If you have any questions, preguntas, anytime. There haven't been a whole lot of questions today. Don't be afraid to ask a stupid question, because it's not a stupid question. Any question you're going to ask, I have asked. I guarantee you. I love asking stupid questions. All right, so now I just want to talk about how we look at security in general, how we look at this problem, because especially when we're talking about the basics, we have to take a more positive view towards it, or I think we don't get very far. We don't go very far. So let me know, raise your hand if you've ever heard either of these things, and I'll take a drink of water. These are very defeatist statements. It's a very negative way of looking at these things. And when I hear people say these, especially when they're defenders, most often I hear vendors say these. They say, here's how it is unless you buy our product. Like Chad said this morning. It's like the maturity model. Like once you get to stage 3 and you get all our product, this doesn't apply anymore, you're good. But this is the kind of thinking we have to get away from, because this is just admitting defeat before you even start. It's like my son when I try and get him to do homework. He's like, my grade's already bad. Why bother? I'm not doing my homework. I have an F. So I call bullshit on this. It's bullshit. And it's the worst bullshit because it convinces us that we've already failed. Like, just don't even bother. Just make sure you keep your resume updated. When you get breached, find a new job. So, again, we were looking at all these lists. We talked about PCI. PCI has over 300 requirements. CIS has 20 categories of things to do. The numbers are huge. These to-do lists are huge. This is I think one of the healthiest and one of the most effective ways to approach, like when you don't know where to start, think of something you don't want to happen. Maybe it's a breach that just occurred, that your CIO, your CISO is very worried about, your CEO. Could that happen to us? Maybe. Go after that scenario. Find a way to simulate that breach. We looked at things like Infection Monkey, some of these tools you can use to, and also in the extras that I give you, has some methods that I use to do that breach impact assessment. Where you can actually simulate the different actions that will occur if a breach happens. And it's great when we get the details of those breaches because then we can simulate it and we can say, yes, you could be the next Equifax, or no, you wouldn't. Being able to answer those questions is very powerful, especially when you're asking for more money, more people. If you can answer those questions, no, we're in really bad shape, or yes, we're in very bad shape, or no, we're not. So use scenarios, come up with scenarios. So I want to talk about some myths also. And Chad talked about some myths this morning. I almost told him to quit giving my talk. And this is one of them. Like, vendors want us to believe, that breaches are, end of days for a company, are events that will kill a company. And for at least 10 years, I've been looking for companies that have been destroyed by a breach, and this is the list. It's 9 companies. If you know of more, I'm sure there may be some smaller companies that could be on this list that just didn't make the news maybe. But a decade, I've been asking people, can you add to my list? And I've been looking for these events, and 9 companies. It doesn't mean a breach isn't bad. It will cost a lot of money, cost a lot of pain, maybe employees get fired, but it's not as big as they'll have us believe. It's very rarely an ending event, a business ending event. And again, where we do have breaches, where we do have details, Code Spaces provided a lot of detail. Buffer, when they got breached, provided a lot of detail. There were government reports on the Target breach, on the Equifax breach that included a lot of the technical details, like specifically, here's what they did wrong. So it's worth finding those and studying them. So I went through one of those reports. I went through the Equifax report, and I actually live tweeted this as I read through the report. And I found, this actually isn't all of them, I found a total of 34 major issues that they had. And 5 of them, if they had fixed, could have stopped the whole breach. So there are at least 5 things they could have done that could have stopped the whole thing. Not just one. Like when you hear it in the news, it sounds like just struts. Just because they didn't patch Apache struts, they got hacked. It wasn't, as you can see, it wasn't that simple. It was much more complicated than that. That's an 18-month certificate there. So, and again, if we put those, so this is another cool thing that you can do with this cyber defense matrix, is you can take these breach failures and map them. And then you can overlay that on your own. You know, like if you look at what controls you have and you've built this out, you can then take a breach, put them on top of each other, and see if you're missing things, you know, that could result in that breach. So now all of a sudden you have a way to map these things. You know, here's our security, here's what happened to Equifax, put them on top of each other. Could it happen to us? You get a yes or no. I mean, it's not quite that simple, but it's pretty useful. It's pretty close. And the ones in red, these are the 5. 1, 2, 3, 4. I don't know. I thought there was a 5th, but these, the ones in red are the more important ones. So yeah, that number 2, that's struts. That was the struts one, I think. Yeah, no software inventory. Yeah, so they, let's see. We got a couple minutes. So long story short with Equifax, they knew about the struts problem. And they had meetings about it, and they looked for it, and they looked for it, and they looked for it, and they didn't find it in their environment, but it was there. So it's not that they were just lazy or, you know, not well managed or well, I mean, there were management issues, but they tried. That didn't come out in the news. They tried really hard to find struts. They were aware of this vulnerability being a big deal. And that's almost more scary, I think. The fact that they knew how big of a deal it was, and they tried really hard, and they still failed. So they, the details, it was a legacy system. The people who knew about that system were gone. No one else knew exactly what was on that system. There was no inventory of the software in that system, so no one knew. The knowledge left the company. It was never documented. There was no list of, here's all the software installed on this server. So that's where we see a lot of these failures. (1011) undetect is, so they wrote a custom snort rule. So remember what I said? Test your controls. They wrote a snort rule. No one tested it. It didn't work. They tried. They just made lots of mistakes. Okay, so recapping, wrapping things up here. Security is large, broad, and difficult, but you know, I think it's a mistake to see security as totally separate from IT. I think security should work more with IT, work more with the business. When I used to hire people in my security department, when I was back on the financial side, the first week I'd have a new employee, I would send him to sit with the business. He wouldn't do security. He would sit with people on the phones. He would sit with loss prevention. He would sit with different departments, spend a week understanding how the business works, how people use our internal applications. And not only did they get understanding of how the business worked out of that, but they made friends. So now, like, when we're talking about patching a system, you know, and we're wondering, I wonder if this would break them or bother anyone if we change this. You know, they know who to call. They say, let me call Lucy and find out. You know, or, no, I've seen that system. You can't do that. It'll break. You'll get fired. You know, so they have all this knowledge that, you know, a lot of times people in security come in and they start working immediately. They don't understand the business. They don't know the people. And all of a sudden you're asking them, hey, we need to take the system down immediately. We need to patch it. Like, who the fuck are you? Get out of here. I've never seen you before. You don't have that power. Get out of here. So that really helped them. You know, they had clout and they had friends all over the business. 1 week, just 1 week before they get pulled into all the meetings, before they get buried in work, you know, just get to know the business. So make friends. Security needs help. We can't do it by ourselves. And IT is, I mean, it's their problem too. They made a lot of these problems, right? In the first place. You know, if they own systems, they should own part of the problem. You know, security is their problem too. You set up that Windows server. You didn't harden it. Why should I have to do all the work? CIS we talked about. It's a helpful roadmap, and I would treat it as a roadmap. Again, like pick and choose from it. Like there's no way we're going to get this done without hiring extra people, so let's just do these 3 things instead. You know, pick and choose from it. Any progress is good progress. You know, we talked about ignore the news. You know, every breach isn't the end of the world. Every vulnerability isn't the end of the world. And communicate with each other. So this has taken a long time, but everyone I've talked to, it's huge. You know, we now have, I don't know if it's common here, but there's financial groups where different banks, people from different banks get together and they talk about their problems and how to fix them. You know, oh, we found this solution that works really well. Oh, we didn't think of that. You know, why should, you know, security doesn't, you know, I mean, yes, these banks are competing, but the security people aren't competing with each other. They're working on the same problems. I've seen so many companies come up with amazing solutions, but they never tell anybody because their company doesn't allow them to talk to anyone else. You know, oh, that's now a trade secret or something, right? Solving security problems? It's everybody's problem. You know, so share more. Try and share more. And then after this presentation, you know, I think these are things you can do right away. Come up with those scenarios. What do you not want to happen? Discuss them. Do tabletop exercises. You know, walk through. How many people are familiar with tabletop exercises? You just coming up with these scenarios and talk through them as if it's occurring. Okay, the server got hacked. What now? Data got leaked. Now you know, there's a story in the New York Times about it. There's a story in the press. What do we do now? You know, and just talk through it. I have 40 more slides. No, I'm done. I'm done. So I'll leave it on this one because it's got the QR code again. And this is the stuff that's in there. That mind map I showed earlier is in there. Breach impact report sample, CISO guide. I told you I wouldn't finish early.